So much for that introduction, and thank you all the organizers for organizing this today. Very big thank you to all the viewers who have spared time on Saturday morning to hear me on this topic of GST and frauds. Before I go to explain that what basically frauds are, and when it comes to tax jurisprudence or fiscal laws, what these frauds would mean, and three very important fundamental aspects related to frauds, which we will discuss. And then, of course, we will go to issue of how these issues could be tackled or how these frauds could be tackled. I will start with a small story. Actually, not a story, it's an experience. Without going into the technicalities of the issue, I argued one matter in Gujarat. And when I argued this matter in Gujarat, this was favoring the Indian exporters, but were completely against the banks. And I argued this matter, and fortunately, it was given in my favor. The ruling was given in my favor. Couple of months later, the banks approached me, these foreign banks, and they said that we want you to argue on the same issue. And I said that I cannot argue on the same issue because I have already taken my stand and I have argued in favor of exporters. Now, if I argue for the banks, I will be completely taking a U-turn of what my arguments were there last time. But they insisted me quite a bit and they said, no, we want you to argue and so on and so forth. So I told them that the risk is all yours. But when I argued at the second stage for the banks, and I was on the verge of getting the favorable order, my learned friend on the other side told the court that, Lord, only some few months back, Mr. Rastogi was arguing completely on the other side. And today he is doing this. Fortunately or unfortunately, the bench was convinced by the argument which I was doing at the second time. And I had to categorically mention to the bench that if the lordships have committed a mistake last time, the lordship should not commit a mistake today. And in any case, they have right to go in appeal. Probably they will go in appeal for both the issues. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to court litigation, facts, submissions, they differ every time you argue. The approach changes every time you argue. So before we go on to frauds, I just want to very, very clearly tell one thing, that for few things, there is nothing right or wrong. There is a lot of interpretation, whether the glass is half full of water or half empty. As an advocate, I can argue it on either sides. And a lot of people ask us how much 2 plus 2 is. And we always say that how much you want it to be. We can argue that as well. So I think from that perspective, let's go on to understand that what key essential elements of fraud has. And as far as I understand any fraud, and I have the privilege of today arguing a lot of these bail matters, anticipatory bail matters related to tax and fiscal statutes. And fortunately, I have not lost even a single matter when it comes to these criminal matters, because here facts are very important. Now, coming back to three essential elements of fraud. One, there has to be a criminal deception. Two, it must be intentional. And three, there has to be a criminal deception. When it comes to GST, all offenses are not criminal deceptions. which means they may not get into the angle of criminality, while they may still be considered as frauds. And there could be certain monetary limits as well, which are prescribed under the GST regime to categorize these offenses as criminal, lead to a financial gain, but are related to interpretation, may not ultimately fall within that framework of fraud. It must result in a financial gain. And hence, if anything has been done which is not resulting in financial gain, can there be a categorization of fraud in that case? Today under GST, a lot of these arrests have been happening for circular trading and fake invoices. Let's just take a pause. Let's just forget, what the fraud is, but let's just understand that what this circular trading is. Now, what happens is A sells the goods to B sells the good to C sells good to D. The goods have gone from A, B, C, D and back to A. Now there could be two questions. One, were the goods ever there? Secondly, is there a case of tax evasion? Now let's just understand. Assuming that the goods were not there, which is the most complicated situation, everybody in the chain has paid the tax. So is there a case of tax evasion? A paid the tax, B paid the tax, C paid the tax, D paid the tax, and they took eligible credits. So the first point which arises is whether this is a case of GST evasion. And the answer is no. It is not a case of GST evasion. Now, if the disputed credit is asked for reversal, and let's say my credit is asked for reversal, and I reverse that, will you give the same benefit to the person who charged that to me? And if the benefit is not going to the person who charged it to me because my procurement was not a supply, then even his supply was not a supply. And hence there should not be any tax. So the interpretation, what is relevant to be seen is this a case of tax evasion? And I will change that. I will not call it tax evasion. I will say, is this a case of GST evasion? That is first question. Now, we know for a fact that for something to fall within the gamut of fraud, there has to be financial gain. It need not be only the tax or the GST element, but financial gain. And why these people do this? These people do these things to increase the turnover of their company, take higher bank loans, go into IPO, become public, show their turnover. So which means that while there may not be any GST evasion, there is a high likelihood that they may fall within the purview of fraud, because there will be some financial gain which will happen. And all this is very, very factual and has to be seen on a case-to-case basis. Most of these situations which are coming under GST relate to GST tax evasion. Is that the right way to criminalize these offenses? Or is GST a right act under which an offense can be booked? Because the entire controversy under GST is with respect to what is supply. In most of these cases of circular trading, there may not be any supply. And the department argues that the supply is not there because there is no physical movement of goods. And that's what is wrong. Because for a supply to happen, there is no requirement under law for physical movement of goods. If I have a pen here, it may remain with me, but the ownership may change. Ownership may change on papers, by documentation, and so on and so forth. So from that perspective, it is important to understand that for supply to happen, movement of goods may or may not be there. But having said that, all of these transactions, if we see, are done intentionally. There is no interpretation issue. In most of the cases, there would be criminal deception and the amount involved would be much more, which would fall within those provisions which are criminal in nature as far as the tax laws are concerned. And of course, any statutory provision will also have to be seen in light of the constitutional changes, the constitutional aspects. And we will have to see whether arrests could be made in such cases and whether Article 21, which is personal liberty, comes into play. So having said that, let's move a little ahead and we'll come back to this interesting aspect a little later once again. Lot of issues are today coming before the authorities wherein the goods are imported in the country at a lower customs duty rate. So for instance, if the rate is 5%, these are imported at 2.5%. Now, there are a couple of important questions, and whether this would amount to fraud or not is another set of story in itself. One, we need to understand that ignorance of law is no excuse. So if you have ignored the law and have imported goods under wrong category, then you need to pay the differential tax. Going back to the basics, was it intentional? Needs to be proved. Because even the customs authorities become answerable, because at the time of import of these goods, bill of entry is filed, which gives a declaration. Now, if there is no malafide at the time of import when this declaration is given, then can a tax be levied at a later stage? So what needs to be seen again is whether there was misdeclaration, was it intentional, whether it results in financial gain, and whether there was criminal deception. One very important concept in law which is now emerging is unintended omission. So if the transition has happened from the erstwhile regime to the current regime, and the entire tariff, there is a copy paste which happens. You copy those tariff headings and you put it in the new GST regime. Now, if the old tariff heading says imports with respect to these items will bear a concessional rate, when these are used for manufacture of excisable goods, and that is identically copied and pasted in the GST regime, when today we do not have excisable goods, or we have very limited excisable goods, which are these products such as petroleum products. So what is the intention of the legislation? Can law be ignored? Is it to be seen as it is worded? And so on and so forth. So these are relevant aspects which are today becoming very, very important under the GST regime. I had the privilege of arguing a landmark decision before Gujarat High Court. And this relates to pre-import condition. Don't worry. If you do not understand pre-import condition, don't worry. Even I don't understand. And that's exactly what I argued in court. Now, lot of these importers missed this pre-import condition and claimed certain benefits. The question is today whether this would amount to a fraud or not. If the statutory provision is seen per se, there is a pre-import condition. And if you miss that, there is a fraud. But if the law is so vague that either I or you or even the judges or the department is not able to clearly define that what this pre-import condition is, then the doctrine of void for vagueness will come in. And this legal principle, put in simple words, says that if something is vague enough, then it is void. So doctrine of void for vagueness comes into play. And hence in few situations it could be proved that even if law has been missed, it may not amount to fraud. Litigation, interestingly, is very different as from advisory. Because when you have to argue in courts, you will have to think from all different perspectives. Constitution perspective, this perspective, statute perspective, intention of the legislation. And hence, for any transaction to qualify as an evasion of tax or a case of fraud, you need to apply all of these principles to see whether it effectively results into a fraudulent activity. A lot of people ask me, which is the best case which you have argued? And I tell them, out of these 150 writ petitions, the best case which I have argued is the only case which I have lost. And I correct myself thereafter by saying, is the only case which people feel I have lost. And why I say that is, this is an interesting issue with respect to intermediary services, wherein a person who's situated in India and acts as a buying agent or a broker or an intermediary renders services to someone situated outside of India, receives money in convertible foreign exchange, becomes subject to GST in India because place of provision of that service is in India as per the law. Now, if you compare these services to chartered accountant services, lawyer services, portfolio management services, investment bankers, and so on and so forth, all of these other services get the benefit, but intermediary doesn't get the benefit. Now, why I say that I have not lost the case is that while the Gujarat High Court may have held that this is constitutional, Gujarat High Court has held that this petition be treated, or the respondent or the petitioner may be eligible to make a representation to the Union of India to address this issue. Which means that while the battle may have been lost, the war is not lost. And of course, finally, it has to be decided not only by one court, but by multiple courts and ultimately by the apex court, Supreme Court. But now coming on to the same concept of intermediary, there could be two set of intermediaries. One, an honest intermediary who writes in his invoice that I am rendering intermediary services and challenges the constitutional validity of the taxation in the jurisdictional high court. And second set of intermediary service provider who doesn't put the classification under the right head. Instead of saying that he's an intermediary, he commits a fraud and says that I provide management consultant services. The entire agreement is worded as if he's doing management consultancy and sending reports, whereas he acts as an intermediary in India. So what happens in this situation? An honest business is suffering and has to knock the doors of the court for justice, whereas a person who changes it or dishonestly describes the services gets the benefit. And hence, what is also important to be seen while arguing these constitutional aspects is the rule of mischief. Is there some mischief which is being created due to this provision or taxability and so on and so forth? So these are some very interesting cases which are currently being argued or are under discussion and debate. Going on back to the arrest provisions, interestingly, when these arrests happen for these circular trading or fake invoices, the word which is used in the statute for a commissioner to arrest, it says when a commissioner has reason to believe. And that reason to believe is very important. Any adjective which comes in law is not a good sign. I may have a reason to believe sitting here that it's raining outside. I have a reason to believe. It's very wide, very vague. Fortunately or unfortunately, the same phrase reason to believe is also mentioned in Criminal Procedure Code when you apply for anticipatory bail. So which means that if a commissioner has a reason to believe, the judge may also have a reason to believe that he will be arrested and may grant an anticipatory bail. So interestingly, these terms have to be deliberated, defined, argued, and all of this is factually driven. And this leads and opens the discussion that how relevant these frauds are today. What are the monetary implications? And again, I'm repeating those important facts. Is there an intention? Are these resulting in financial gains? And would they get into the statute with the criminal deception angled to them? Now let's consider 3-4 different examples with respect to GST. And these are in addition to the wrong classification example, which I mentioned in case of intermediaries. So if you classify your service wrong, you may get the benefit of rate. The other important aspect, and which is very, very common in India, is undervaluation. A lot of people go to banquet halls for booking of the banquet hall, marriage function, this function. They say, what is the cost? Banquet hall says 1 lakh plus 18% GST, 118,000. Why not you make it 50,000 in cash and 50,000 in check and charge GST only on 50,000? We save 9,000. That's undervaluation. A lot of banquets do this. This is very common. This is a serious fraud, because not only there is an evasion of GST with respect to that percentage on half of that value, but also this amount he would not disclose for his income tax purposes. Undervaluation becomes a serious fraud in India. unknown fraud, unproven, difficult to prove, and how to tackle these frauds. I was having a discussion with Mr. Arun Jaitley at the time of this GST implementation. I had several interactions with him and Finance Minister and even Mr. P. Chidambaram way back. We used to discuss that if we need to track these frauds, it has to be artificial intelligence. It has to be systems. Artificial intelligence and system has to trigger and give these systematic reports to the GST officers. And by the way, today, the government has capability of using artificial intelligence beyond our imagination. All data with respect to GST is in the GST network. There have been raids based on artificial intelligence, which shows that why suddenly the tax collected or input tax credit, there is a substantial change. And if you see these undervaluation provisions for banquet halls, it's very simple. You analyze periodic reports for these. There cannot be wide variation. It cannot be 10,000 versus 1 lakh. It can be 80, 90 to 1 lakh. It could be seasonal. Marriage season rate could differ, etc. and so on and so forth. But in the same season, same event, different rate, there has to be justification. Undervaluation comes into play. And all of this can be tackled. And I think the question was raised that how best it could be tackled. I think it can be tackled in 3 ways. Artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence. It has to be built up in the system in such a way so that our hardworking officers get all that information. We have a lot of data, but that data processing has to happen intelligently. And yes, of course, after the data processing, all hard work and reasonableness, even at the level of the officers, has to happen. Because it should not happen that the moment I get some data, I become so excited, I just catch that person and put him in behind bars, take him in judicial custody, and then don't do anything for 60 days. That's wrong. That's wrong approach. Another aspect which I would want to share, and which is a clear case of fraud, is tax collected but tax not paid. For instance, I go to a dry cleaning shop and I am a customer not registered under GST. I go there and I get my clothes dry cleaned, 1,000 rupees the bill, and he charges 180 rupees GST on that. He gives me a receipt, a computer generated receipt or a handwritten receipt. And what I do is I pick my clothes and leave the receipt there only. He will pick that receipt, tear that receipt, scroll back the computer and generate the same serial numbered receipt. And because I have paid cash also, he may just keep that cash and account it separately. So which means that there are few transactions on which the business has charged tax to the consumer. Consumer has paid by cash, did not use credit card. Cash got collected also, tax got collected also, but has been pocketed. The consumer has been burdened with tax. 18% is no less a tax. And I've been writing in a lot of my columns, etc. If you do Google search, especially this last article, first post, where there are 4 major pointers which I am suggesting to FM. Is this rate rationalization has to happen? 18% is a very higher rate. We need to moderate the tax rate and the tax base to avoid such collected but not paid issues. So in a case of this dry cleaning issue, it's a clear case of fraud. Another issue, and I will close my part with that issue, and we'll open it for discussion and Q&A, is milestone based. The Indian taxation system provides for certain milestones for a thing to be taxable. So for instance, if you're a home buyer and you buy a fully constructed property, there is no GST. If you buy an under construction property, there is GST. Now, if you go to the builder and you tell him that what is the status of the project, he says 3 months, it will be done. And then you will ask about the GST. So he will tell you 2 options: with credits, without credits, 5%, 12%. And if you are an honest taxpayer and an honest home buyer, you will say, but preferably we will wait for 3 months. We will save on this 5% tax. And that's not wrong. That's not fraud. Because that's permissible in law. But real estate player can tell you, because he may lose a customer, no, don't worry. Don't go here and there. Don't come after 3 months. We will schedule the transaction today only. But we will show it as loan today, reverse the loan, and then take the money back again from you. Now, he doesn't want to lose a customer and suggest a fraud that you precede the transaction, but show it as a loan. This is fraud. So, when it comes to GST law, there are a lot of such issues which could lead to fertile thinking and fraudulent activities. And that's why we've been suggesting government to moderate the tax rate so that people do not feel the pinch of these taxes. For instance, this anti-profiteering provision was implemented so as to curb inflation, and the benefit goes on to the customer. But which life insurance company or the insurance company has given benefit? You may have life insurance policies, the credits may have increased, but the benefit has not come. So, but is that a fraud? It may not be a fraud, may not be intentional, but the benefit has not been passed. So with that, I will take a pause, stop for a while, and please feel free to raise questions, and to the best of my ability, I'll answer them.
Abhishek ji,
yes, sir.
There are certain questions.
Yeah. Should I go to the chat box? I can go to the chat box, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr.
Please,
Satish,
okay, that is also
one is asking, I think fraud evasion is different situation, but abnormal tax also found as one of the reasons for evading. Yes, there is a direct correlation between the higher tax rate and the higher chances of tax evasion. But that does not mean that even if the tax rate is higher, you are allowed by law to evade. The fraud will remain a fraud. And he writes that the trader suggests for transaction without bill so that GST can be avoided. For example, gold trade. Now, when it comes to gold trade and you are having this transaction completely in cash, the supply is subject to GST. It is just because the transaction has happened in cash, there is no GST either charged or paid. And as per the statutory provisions also, Satish ji, these will fall within the fraudulent activities as far as the GST provisions are concerned. Money is writing,
Yeah.
can evasion be the ground for reduction of tax? By that logic, there cannot be any product or service with high GST rate. And you're right. It cannot be a ground for tax reduction. But if you see gold rate and import on gold 20 years back or 25 years back, the smuggling of gold was much higher at that point of time as compared to today. So it need not be a ground, but is a consequential effect in certain cases.
So there are some more questions just about this chart, sir.
After 60 days, whether a person will get the default bail, and it will completely depend whether the charge sheet or the prosecution report has been filed. So if the prosecution report has been filed before the 60th date, the default bail may not come in. Machine learning is, of course, an important concept, Satish ji, and it's very important that our officers, businesses, consultants, everybody use that. And I think information technology, artificial intelligence, and the use of technology for newer purposes will remain the focus of both the businesses and the government. Satish ji is writing about the power of arrest. Gujarat High Court in a recent order has armed GST commissioners with the power to authorize arrest of a person if he has reason to believe that the person has committed a cognizable and bailable offense, and that the power can be exercised even before completion of assessment and determination of tax evaded. That's right. While Gujarat High Court has passed this order, there are different courts which have taken different approaches with respect to the constitutionality of arrest provisions and GST frauds. Bombay High Court, in the case argued by me in case of Sapna Jain versus Union of India, has taken a completely different approach. We have got similar orders from Bombay, Delhi, and several other courts. But yes, this Gujarat High Court decision is worth the read. While I may personally not agree with that, but we will respect the order of the court. Fake invoices for getting the input tax credit is very common. And you are very right that these fake invoices, Satish ji, have become a menace. What needs to be seen, of course, is the intention, financial loss, and whether there is any leakage of tax or not, and which could be different in fake invoices as compared to circular trading. Circular trading, everything gets rotated, circularly comes back. And fake invoices may differ because these are just the cases of fake invoices, and the person, in fact, supplying may not have paid the tax in few cases as well. So those are the issues. Yes, Satish ji, these numbers are right, what you are mentioning with respect to illegally availing or passing ITC by using fake invoices and causing loss to the exchequer. Tax officials said that the use of fake invoices so wrongly avail ITC has been gradually increasing and has become a concern for the government, especially at a time when revenues collection is depressed. That's right. That's a right statement. It's a cause of concern. And these are, I think I have tried to answer some of.
Yes, all the questions above, sir. Now there is one more question below. I think there are no questions above that, sir.
Rajesh is writing purchase goods from Mr. X through invoice from Messrs. ABC Enterprises. Subsequently, GST department informs that Mr. Y is the proprietor of Messrs. ABC Enterprise and Mr. Y have given on oath that he never supplied any goods. So your invoice is fake. What can be done? So when these fake invoices issues are concerned, technically, I must receive the goods. I must pay for the consideration, including taxes to the vendor. And when I have made the payment to the vendor also has a liability to discharge the tax liability. Now, if the vendor gives on oath that these goods were never supplied, of course, department will have lot of these concerns about taxability. It may also happen that Mr. Y in this case may have had genuine turnover of 5 rupees and fake turnover of 95 rupees. But your transaction may fall within that 5 rupee and he may have given a generic statement there, not creating a distinction between that breakup of 5 versus 95. And hence, even in these cases of fake invoice reporting, one has to see that these entities, were they involved in some sort of genuine trading as well? And the credit reversal on 100% for such transactions cannot happen in case there are certain genuine transactions as well. Yes, and a lot of this is done for availing bank loans. That has been seen as a trend. But fraud remains a fraud and investigation need to happen. I am not against investigating frauds. Please don't take me wrong. I am against putting people in judicial custody. Today, when these frauds are determined by artificial intelligence or otherwise, the revenue authorities have all the powers to summons me, to question me, to take a statement. New rule 86A says block my credits, reverse my credits, put restrictions on my credits, want me to pay 1% at least by cash. If the tax has returned, the details have not been uploaded by the vendor, then restrict that amount to 20%, reduced to 10%, reduced to 5%. All of these provisions are there to tackle the fraud or the GST evasion. What I am trying to say is that when the authorities have a power to pluck and take control of these issues, is jail the right remedy? Taking people in judicial custody, is it the right approach? Is the question which needs to be answered. I think, yes, you are mentioning about Supreme Court ruling on station bail, certain non-cognizable and bailable. Yes, of course, that can be adopted. In fact, Supreme Court is to decide on these bail issues, the 3-judge bench. in PV Ramana Reddy versus Union of India and Sapna Jain versus Union of India. Two decisions completely contradictory. Bombay High Court giving me a favorable order in case of Sapna Jain, and at the same time, Telangana High Court in case of PV Ramana Reddy taking a different turn. So yes, interesting times ahead as far as these frauds and GST is concerned. Artificial intelligence is not created upfront because every technology and development requires a lot of cost. With a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility also. The government has started implementing this artificial intelligence and is doing that in piecemeal. But I feel that few years down the line, it will be more used as compared to today. Complicated GST process of time barring availment of credit has already been challenged by me in various courts. Restriction of credit proportionately in case of exempt transactions has also been challenged, by the way. Are some of very restrictive practices, you are right. Can this also lead to fraud? See, these may lead to fraud. So for instance, if you see restrictions placed under section 17(5) C, D and H, goods lost or stolen or goods destroyed by fire, you have to reverse the credit. So rather than showing them as goods lost, you show them as goods supplied at a negligible price. 100 rupee good, you can sell it for 1 rupee. There is nothing in law which prevents you to sell it at 1 rupee or even 10 paisa. So yes, that situation can arise. See, Satishji, as far as my experience is concerned, I have argued a lot of these matters in Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court, we could get favorable orders for mostly everybody till the time Sapna Jain went to Supreme Court. In Delhi High Court also I've got some favorable orders. Uttarakhand High Court and Odisha also I've got a lot of these orders. But all such orders will depend completely on the facts of the case. What are the facts? What has the approach been taken by the authorities? Is there a case of genuine tax evasion? Is the tax fraud amount more than 5 crores? And so on and so forth. In few cases, the submissions could be completely non-technical, such as when you want to take a person in judicial custody, is there an element by which there could be influencing of any witness, tampering of any data, fleeing of the applicant outside country? And all of that has to be brought on record also at various stages and at various times to get the benefits for clients. So it may not be completely GST related aspects. It could be completely related to the criminal jurisprudence that you try to get benefit for the clients. And yes, it is of course case to case basis. You're right. As far as the Constitution of India is concerned, there are certain sectors which are preferred sectors. So for example, healthcare and education. Let's park healthcare for the time being. But when it comes to education sector, we want to ensure education for all, free education for underprivileged, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the tax rate, while you have given the exemption for these priority sectors, the inverted duty structure refund is not being made eligible for these services which are otherwise exempted. And that's why I have taken this issue to different courts for schools. Hospitals had also approached, but ultimately did not file the petitions. And schools have a better prospect also of winning in the case because directive principles of state policy in the Constitution give special emphasis to education. So yes, from that perspective, this exemption and denial of inverted duty structure is not a good scene. But as far as the future of the healthcare industry is concerned, these must remain exempt. But what I understand is that if they really want to remove the impact of duties or inverted structure duty or blockage of credits, they must be given refund with respect to the taxes which come into the pool and remain unutilized. And that will resolve a lot of these problems. I'll answer both of them. As far as your first point is concerned, the law wants to ensure that you get the credit, because credit is nothing but cash. You get that cash back and you get that money back in your credit ledger only after you paid. Appears logical. So the practical solution which we give, and I don't believe in that you do on day one and reverse it on day two. I think you could keep it very simple that as you keep on paying, you keep on availing credit. And for those invoices where you feel that you would not be able to pay in 180 days, you can ask the vendors at a later stage to revise the invoices. So that could be one way. Second, with respect to one nation, one tax, your concerns are absolutely right. The objective of GST was to reduce compliances. Now, for me to take the credit of the state taxes in different jurisdictions, if I have to apply for registration in all of these states, it becomes a big problem for me. You are right, absolutely right. But if the intention is only to avail credits, then we must not forget the provisions of IGST. So for example, if you are in Maharashtra and you go to Gujarat and the person there charges the local tax CGST and SGST, the SGST of Gujarat will of course become a cost unless and until you have a local registration in Gujarat because you are based out of Bombay. But in those situations, one must see whether because you have a registered office outside of Gujarat, the transaction becomes IGST. And if the transaction is interstate, then you may get the credit without any bar. So for each of such transactions, we may have to look whether these are interstate transactions and whether rather than the CGST plus SGST, IGST is charged. But that will of course depend on the nature of the service and whether the place of provision is outside that state or not. The event management service would depend on where the event takes place. But the management consultant service doesn't depend on that, where the event takes place. So what a lot of people do is that apart from the event management company, they also appoint a management consultant. So the event management service will be to the management consultant and management consultant will bill to the business, which becomes an IGST transaction. That's the only way out. In fact, if you remember the Senvet Credit Rules 2004, there were provisions wherein the person who's receiving the credit had to take reasonable steps. But then there are certain provisions which would ensure that you pay to him, he pays to the authorities. It is all done in a time-bound manner, and then the credit comes. That remains a challenge. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for organizing, and thanks to all the participants for being. Thank you.